name is Chad Glendenning. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Canon Law here at St. Paul University. And it's my pleasure to welcome our presenters, Professor Myriam Wijlens, as well as a co-presenter, Professor Susan Wood, and also to welcome all of you, the participants, to our webinar. This is organized jointly by the Faculty of Canon Law, the Canadian Canon Law Society, and the Centre for Canonical Services. And so it's my pleasure to introduce the presenter of our webinar, Professor Myriam Wijlens. She's a Dutch theologian, full professor of canon law at the University of Erfurt, Germany, and has served her university as vice president. She studied canon law here at St. Paul University, so we're very proud to claim her as our own. She's been a visiting professor at the Catholic University of America in Washington and has lectured around the world. She's been involved in the Faith and Order Commission from 2008 to 2023, the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission, ARCIC, from 2018 to 2025, and the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors from 2018 to 2022. She serves as a consultant to the General Secretariat of the Synod from 2021 and is a member of the Canon Law Commission of the Synod and the Coordinating Committee of the Synod on Synodality of 2023 as well as 2024. As well, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Susan Wood, who is a professor of systematic theology at Regis College in the Toronto School of Theology here in Canada. She received her doctorate in systematic theology from Marquette University. And Dr. Wood served as president of the Catholic Theological Society of America from 2014 to 2015 and has received the John Courtney Murray Award in 2021. In addition to numerous articles, she has published books on baptism, orders, and ecumenism, and soon her book entitled A Synodal Church, The Christian Faithful on Pilgrimage, will be published by the publisher Rowman and Littlefield. Based on our presenters' vast experience on synodality, they will be presenting on the topic Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord, Women Participation in Leadership and Governance in a Synodal Church. So Myriam, Susan, it's a pleasure to welcome you here. I turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Chad Glendenning, Dean of the Faculty in Ottawa. It's so wonderful to be back. As you mentioned, I studied in Ottawa, and being Dutch, the greatest thing that Ottawa has to offer is not only a library, but a wonderful skating rink. So it's wonderful to be back in Ottawa, even if it's only virtually. I'm also delighted that that my invitation to Dr. Susan Wood, that you, Susan, accepted this invitation, because I really think that we have been involved with a whole group of people, about 14 people, called and brought together in the Peter and Paul seminar, a seminar of theologians and canon lawyers, to look into necessary reforms of the church. And I have invited you to join us today to make some comments at the end of my presentation, because as a theologian, I think you can highlight some of the questions that we have and maybe help us to think forward. Yes, we can look at the next slide. What are we going to do today? We're going to look a little bit about what is actually the question that arises from the Synod. Then we will look into the foundation to come to an answer to that question, from Vatican II to the promulgation of the 1983 Code. Then we will look at modifications in the law that have come about actually from Pope Paul VI till Pope Francis. And then finally, we will look into theological questions. So let's begin with the next slide and look at what came from the Synod. So throughout the Synod, and you just heard from Chad Glendenning, I've been involved in the Synod from the beginning. I've had the privilege of reading all the documents from around the world. And really what you see also in the final documents that have come out, and the document of 2023 is to be considered as well, this is very clear, is to be considered as well as a part of the final documentation that the Synod has produced. Why is that? Because the final session of 2024 only took up the subjects that needed a further deepening. So the votes that were taken on the 2023 document are still valid. And we need to look into that as well. So the Synod, throughout the whole process, what we see is people are really discovering baptism. And through that discovery, they discover also that there is an equality in dignity of the people, be they lay people, be they priests, be they deacons, be they bishops, or even the Pope. And from that equality in dignity, people became aware that there is a co-responsibility for the mission of the church. So the Synod was not held to look only to the church ad intra, like how do we operate and interact with each other, but the purpose is ultimately the mission of the church. And so we became aware that all our co-workers in the vineyard of the Lord, precisely because of baptism. And I thought it was remarkable that the 112 reports of the Episcopal conferences from around the world, there are 114, but 112, they really display time and again the awareness of people for baptism, and that the baptism leads to the request for this equality and dignity and to be co-workers. It does not come, what many people are thinking, but it does not come from sociological arguments like we have this in society. No, people want this because of baptism. And then in the document of 2023, so the SR means the synthesis report of 2023, it says, it is urgent to ensure that women can participate in decision-making processes and assume roles of responsibility in pastoral care and ministry. The Holy Father has significantly increased the number of women in positions of responsibility in the Roman Curia. This should also happen at other levels of church life, in consecrated life and dioceses. Provisions need to be made in canon law accordingly. The document of 2023. Another point in that document is the call for women to be admitted as judges in all cases and at all levels. Hence, the document says we need opportunities for women to receive appropriate formation. And then there is a request that besides participation in government, there's also a request for a further development of ministries beyond the already existing ones of reader, acolyte, and catechist. Now, who is responsible for that? It is left to the local churches. So we don't have to wait for Rome. It is left to the local churches to develop these ministries so that they can indeed respond to local needs, to local resources, and local possibilities. Let's go to the next slide. In the final document of 2024, I also brought a few quotations because I think they're pretty strong, and you see that in the final document number 60. It's a special number about women. By virtue of baptism, you have it again, by virtue of baptism, women and men have equal dignity as members of the people of God. However, women continue to encounter obstacles in obtaining a fuller recognition of their charisms, vocation, and place in all the various areas of church's life. So this assembly asks for a full implementation of all the opportunities already provided in canon law with regard to the role of women, particularly in those places where they maintain underutilized. There is no reason or impediment that should prevent women from carrying out leadership roles in the church. What comes from the Holy Spirit cannot be stopped. Now remember, this is approved by the Synod. This is not Myriam Wijlens telling you this. This is a statement of the Synod. So we have to find ways to implement all the opportunities that are already there. And what we actually discovered in the Synod is that many, many people are not aware of the opportunities. The document also says that the question of women's access to the diaconal ministry remains open, and this discernment needs to continue. And finally, the Assembly also asked that some attention be given to the language and the images used in preaching, in teaching, and catechesis, and the drafting of official church document giving more space to the contribution of female saints, theologians, and mystics. So I think we could use a few more female saints, but they could also be used in the preaching, in the teaching, the images that we use. So the Synod is asking for that. But that is not the focus of my presentation today. So let's go to the next slide. We have decided that we will speak about participation in decision making and taking. Now, one way of doing that is through synodal ecclesial bodies, such as diocesan and parish pastoral councils, as well as diocesan synods, provincial and plenary councils. And in the document, especially in the documents of last year, and it's not repeated because it wasn't controversial, you will see requests that there is an equal participation of women in all these bodies. So we have to see, and the canon lawyers can provide for that already through the statutes that we have to draft and make for all these institutions. Again, I won't focus on that today. We can do that at another time. We're going to focus on executive and judicial power and the participation of women in that. Now, why is that actually a problem? And how can we find a solution? So if we go to Vatican II, we really see that Vatican II never ever addressed the question of participation of laity in the power of governance. Vatican II was occupied with a very different question, namely, where does the power come from a bishop? Does it come from the Pope by giving an office to the bishop, or where does that power come from? Or does it originate with his ordination? And this was a very strong debate, and the council quite struggled with that. And you can see that in Lumen Gentium at the Nota Explicativa Previa, which is a special note at the end of the document. They are saying, okay, it is given with, and they are using the term sacra potestas, it is given with the ordination, but the bishop still needs a kind of an appointment, an assignment. And we all know this is, for example, a bishop who needs to become a diocesan bishop, or a bishop still needs to be appointed as a vicar general or an episcopal vicar. Otherwise, they still don't and cannot exercise the jurisdiction. So it remains somewhat ambiguous. At the same time, Vatican II also did not really talk about the power of order and jurisdiction. Those terms are not used. It speaks about potestas sacra, but it speaks in general. It decided to choose a whole different way of thinking, namely to think from the tria munera, the three offices of Christ. So through baptism, we all participate in proclaiming, sanctifying, and governing in the church. Let's go to the next one. So the council did not deal with these questions, left it kind of open. And then the canon lawyers, these poor canon lawyers, after 1965, all the council fathers go home, they pack their bags, and the canon lawyers remain. And they now have to draft a code of canon law. What are they going to do with this? So let's see the 1917 code. Well, the 1917 code, this is where they had to start from, said only clerics could exercise the power of jurisdiction. Interesting. But who is a cleric? Well, the cleric in the 1917 code was a person, a man, who had received tonsure. And in 1971, Pope Paul VI, then, let's begin first with 72. Pope Paul VI abolishes minor orders, and to receive tonsure was part of those minor orders. So we then only have deacons, priests, and bishops among the clergy. Already a year before, the Pope has allowed laymen to be appointed as judges in collegiate tribunals for marriage cases only. And this is changed in 1974 to go for all men for all court cases. And what is interesting, it's actually in the United States that a sister is appointed. The bishop writes, I found that letter, a bishop writes to Rome saying, I have sent a sister to Catholic University in Washington, and she studied canon law there. She's been working here for many years in the tribunal, and I think we could appoint her as defender of the bond. And the Holy See is saying, yes, bishop, you can go ahead. So it's a first exception to a rule, but that later becomes then very quickly a general rule. So let's go to the next slide. The canon lawyers are therefore discussing, as the Pope is making these changes with the laity, the canon lawyers are discussing how to understand this tension in Vatican II about the power of governance. And basically two schools are developing on this point. One is the so-called Italian school. The Italian school says all participation of laity is possible in the power of governance. There's no question about it. Look to history. Emperors convoked councils. Popes exercised jurisdiction before being ordained bishop. So some popes actually were indeed elected. They exercised and appointed other bishops, but they were not ordained a bishop. So the canon lawyers among us will remember that the whole procedure for election of a pope today is different. If a man is elected and is not a bishop, he first has to accept that he first has to be ordained a bishop, and then he can exercise the jurisdiction. And the third example that the Italian school invokes was that abbesses in the Middle Ages granted priests the faculty to hear confession. So there's no doubt about this question. Laity did exercise the power of governance. The Munich school, on the other hand, said, no, Vatican II has modified all of this. Look to this problem that we had with popes exercising power of jurisdiction before being a bishop. No, the power is one, the power of governance and the power of orders, and it cannot be, lay people therefore cannot participate. This is now the new doctrine of the council. What does that lead to? Let's go to the next slide. The Code of Canon Law in the 1983 code then decides that laymen and women can cooperate in the power of governance. Now, canon lawyers might know that the word cooperate was a word that didn't just come about. The draft till 1982 had participate. So there was this, let's say, discussion between the Italian school and the Munich school. And the decisive person in that discussion was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who, as some of you might remember, was the Archbishop of Munich when he proposed, so we can think about the Munich school, when he proposed a change from participation into cooperation. So that word was included in the final version. At the same time, the Code of Canon Law kept saying that laymen and women can participate, that's the word used, in pastoral care of a parish. Laymen and women can be judges in the collegiate tribunal with 2 clerics, but there was never really a controversial discussion between the Italian and the Munich school, whether that meant that lay people would or would not exercise jurisdiction. Everybody agreed that being a judge, you exercise jurisdiction. So the Munich school very quickly said, oh, this is a mistake in the Code of Canon Law, and they even wrote a letter to the German Episcopal Conference saying they should never apply this Canon 1421 paragraph 2 because it wouldn't be allowed. So now, around the world, men and women, laymen and women were appointed as judges. So the men were appointed in the 70s, and in 1983, the word layman, the word man was simply erased, and now lay people could be appointed to be judged, but only with 2 clerics, beside them, the clerics being even 2 deacons. Attention that the Munich school also invoked was Canon 274. Only clerics can obtain offices for whose exercise there is required the power of orders or the power of ecclesiastical governance. What did that mean? Well, the controversy remains. There were discussions about the different meanings of cooperare and participare. The Munich school said, you see, the change of wording means they can't participate. The Italian school said, no, history is very clear. It basically means the same. We will return to that in a minute. Meanwhile, Pope John Paul II appoints a religious sister as undersecretary at the Congregation of the Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, and she has the powers that come with the office. And some of them are, it would seem, executive power. We go to the next slide. The changes and the modifications keep coming. So Pope Benedict XVI issues the document Omnium in Mentem in 2010. And this is a document that has come about after the Theological Commission, the International Theological Commission, has studied the matter on deacons. Maybe also in virtue of women, we don't know, but the question of deacons appeared, and it was decided to change the Code of Canon Law and to state that only priests are ordained in persona Christi Capitis, and they exercise sacred power in that function. But the document states that deacons are ordained ad ministeria. Clearly, in this document, what they do not attend to at all is these canonical questions that we as canon lawyers would have. Like, what does that mean for the power of jurisdiction that he is exercising, the deacon? Of course, this impacts the notion of cleric, because now the cleric was a deacon, a priest, and a bishop. The deacon still remains a cleric, but what does that mean that we do have two kinds of clerics? The deacon, interestingly, may continue to act as a single judge. So that has also raised the question. I remember last year in the Synod, a number of bishops came to me and said, why can a deacon be a single judge and a lay person not be a single judge? What's the difference there exactly? So it's a question that we will have to develop. I don't have the answer, but I think it's a question we have to ask. What is interesting, Pope Benedict makes another change. As we all know, in the cases with the good reputation of priests, it was permitted only for priests to be judges, but Pope Benedict changes that too and says laymen and women can be judges in reserved penal cases of clerics at the diocesan level or for clerical institutes of consecrated life. So this is a major change as well. But the changes keep coming. Pope Francis keeps also surprising us, and he abolishes the requirement that a layperson can only serve in a collegiate tribunal composed of 2 clerics. He now says it can be 1 cleric. So imagine just for yourself, suppose we would make a group picture of the 3 judges in 1970. That would be probably 3 priests. And in 2015, that court is now 2 women who, for the occasion of the group picture, have brought their husbands, their children, and their grandchildren, and the 1 cleric who is a deacon and has also brought his wife and children. The question we must ask is, what has changed in the theology behind these 2 group pictures? And that's a question I have to ask the theologians. Then Pope Francis, and now we go back to the equality and dignity, makes a very interesting change in 2021. He abolishes the privilege of cardinals, bishops, and apostolic nuncios to be heard in trials at Vatican City State courts only by the Roman Pontiff, and allows laypersons to serve as judges on these trials. And indeed, Cardinal Becciu is, I think, the first cardinal to stand court in front of a lay judge. There is no limitation whether this judge can be a man or a woman. I personally do not see why this, although it is for Vatican City State courts, why the same could not be applied to Canon 1405. So that means the internal ecclesiastical ecclesial procedures. The rationale that the Pope provides is all share their equality. All share the equality with regard to dignity and activity in building the body of Christ. But Pope Francis doesn't stop. He keeps going. Another change comes, please, the next slide, with the Roman Curia. The Pope Predicate Evangelium, the Pope provides for laypersons to hold an office of leadership in the Roman Curia that might involve the power of governance. And this is explicitly stated in the document. Why is that so, and what does the document say about it? Well, each curial institute carries out its mission by virtue of the power received by the Roman Pontiff. And they exercise in his name a vicarious power. Hence, any member of the faithful can exercise this power. This is from Predicate Evangelium number 5. So basically they're saying there is an office there. The office is exercising vicarious power. We know that from a vicar general, from an episcopal vicar in the diocese. And it is saying, because it's only vicarious, anybody can exercise this unless there is an issue that would specifically require ordination. Interesting is that with the presentation of the document, Archbishop Marco Merlini, Secretary of the Council of Cardinals, he explains that, and now we go back to the terminology, cooperation really means to work together. It means you exercise, he says, the same power. And therefore, and he refers to that debate between the Italian and the Munich school, he says, cooperare and participare means exactly the same. There is no difference. Not everybody agrees to this interpretation. In the summer, following the publication of Predicate Evangelium, there is some reaction by two cardinals, Cardinal Wijlens from the then Dicastery for Bishops, and Cardinal Peter Erde from Budapest, who is a very good canon lawyer, especially in the domain of the history of canon law. But the Pope has issued this document. And not only has he issued the document, he keeps going. He provides first for laypersons to an office of leadership in the Roman Curia that might involve the governance. And the first person to be appointed is then a woman as member as the Dicastery for Bishops in 2023. He appoints a female secretary to the Dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies, and that female secretary was recently appointed as the first female prefect. Interesting, a journalist wrote me immediately after she had issued a decree that she had signed it with prefetta. So it's a new title introduced into the vocabulary of the Holy See, I guess. The next slide, yes, with regard to the synods, the Pope had appointed Sister Natalie Beccard as a woman to be the Undersecretary to the Synod of Bishops. And I think for the conversation we might have and the thinking we do, it's important to recognize that there are two ways of doing this. One way would be the Pope appoints a woman and through a letter of appointment, gives her the power that he wants to give to her. A bishop could do the same. The bishop could write a letter to a person and say, I herewith appoint you with the following powers. The other thing would be that you have an office, and we see this in some European countries, for example, and I think in the United States, you might have that with the office of chancellor. The office has already the power. So the bishop creates a new office. There's nothing stopping him from doing that. The bishop can create other offices than those that are in the Code of Canon Law. And he could spell out what power belongs to that office. And then he could grant that office to a cleric or to a layperson. And the power that that person then exercises is the power that comes with the office. So it's not a delegated power, but it comes directly with the office. The Pope then also, so Sister Natalie, it was not that Sister Natalie was granted the first right to vote in the Synod. No, what was given to her was an office to which belongs the right to vote in the Synod. The next thing was laymen and women could participate as members. Again, the Pope did exactly the same. He appointed them as members, and the statutes had already determined that members had a right to vote. So he appointed them as members and thus hold the right to vote in the Synod in 2023 and 2024. And then the Holy Father recently appointed two women to the 16th Ordinary Council of the General Secretariat of the Synod. So that Ordinary Council was called the Council of Bishops, but I guess it's now called the Ordinary Council of the General Secretariat of the Synod. They don't make really the decisions. It's an advisory body, ultimately to the Synod office and thus to the Holy Father. And then there is another change that comes about. The Pope has provided for a religious brother to be a major superior in a clerical religious institute of consecrated life of pontifical rights. We know as canon lawyers that a major superior in such an institute is an ordinary, Canon 134. And so we have to ask the question, what does it mean when a religious brother is appointed to this position? Is that person an ordinary? I have asked that question at the Dicastery, and there was a smile when I asked, and they said, yeah, we have to make a provision for that, but they didn't share with me the answer. I know that at least six congregations, so institutes of consecrated life, of clerical religious institutes of pontifical right, do now have a brother as a major superior. By the way, I think religious women have exercised executive power. I think they do that by placing juridic acts, erect, suppress provinces, admit members to final vows. I think there's no question about that participation. So we have to ask the question, if we look to all these changes, and for me, it's very important to see that the changes are not just by Pope Francis. There is a permanent change from Pope Paul VI to Pope John Paul II to Pope Benedict to Pope Francis. It's a continuous path of an increase of participation of laity in virtue of their baptism, and probably a deeper reflection on what is happening. Now, I'm really happy, as I said to all of you, that Dr. Susan Wood is joining us, because she is really a specialist on baptismal ecclesiology. She knows so much, and she's really wrote books about the sacrament of orders. So I think we can go back to the PowerPoint maybe later, and or Susan might also want to speak as we are going here. That's fine too. Susan, if you listen to this whole explanation, how do you perceive the theology governing the current provisions for participation in governance and leadership?
That's a big question. And currently, I think it's based on a distinction between hierarchy and laity, and a big divide between the two of them. What I think is going to happen, I'm going to not develop, the current, but maybe the future possibilities a little bit more. So I like to think that the principles for operating in the church are liturgical principles. So we talk about full active conscious participation in the laity. I think that translates into full active participation in the church. What baptism does is that, as Myriam has said, that it gives us the basis, sacramental basis, theological basis for equality of dignity in the church. But I think it does more than that. I think what it does is put the community in a priority to individuals, because what you have is a ministerial community out of which arises a variety of ministers. And so this triple munera of kingly, prophetic, priestly is an attribute of the community as a whole. And it's the community as a whole that is the subject of conciliarity and synodality. And so when you have this, it changes the binary, if you will, from hierarchy, laity. And here I'm using the theology of Bruno Fort, who says that becomes a community, charism is the corollary, not hierarchy, laity. And what we have is the Christi Fidelis, the Christian faithful, notion of that rather than laity, because laity becomes non-ordained, or it becomes somebody who is not as proficient in a profession. And so it's a remainder concept. It's kind of a negative concept. But with a baptismal theology, we start with the Christian faithful. We start with community. We start with what is shared in common before we go to what is different. And you all know that in the Code of Canon Law, and which follows Lumen Gentium, which places chapter 2 on the people of God, which comes about through baptism, before we have distinction of hierarchy and laity in the council, and the code is based on that same thing. There's becomes a baptismal principle that the common and the community precedes the particular. Now, this is going to be important because this communion is an ordered communion. We're not talking about a political democracy. We're not using political, but more of a sacramental basis of authority, I think, in the church. And so what we call this is an ordered community of the Christi Fidelis, some of whom are ordained, some are instituted ministers, some are commissioned workers. They might be commissioned extraordinary ministers of communion. They might be commissioned catechists. They might be, instituted. And the variations of this is based on the sacramental basis, baptism being the foundation of all ministry, but ordination also being a sacramental foundation. Instituted ministries being a lay ministry in the church, but it has stability to it, because once you're instituted, you're never reinstituted, even if you change diocese, to something that's less stable, which would be commissioning. And so the community is made up of a variety of ministries that have a variety of ways you enter into that ministry, whether it's sacramental, installation, or commissioning. And it's an ordered communion, so we're not talking about just an amorphous group of people who then, in their own way, exercise this priestly, kingly, prophetic community. So that's what I think it is. One of the things that ordination adds to a presbyter and a bishop is it initiates them into an apostolic office. So my question to the canonists, Myriam, would be, when you're talking about jurisdiction, which is a foreign concept to the theologians in a way, to what extent is jurisdiction related to apostolic office? And when you're talking about participation or cooperation, is that, to what extent is that in terms of apostolicity? And that would be a distinction, I think, that we might want to hold in terms of this ordered communion. So anyway, those are just some thoughts, I think, on what a baptismal ecclesiology does. It prioritizes the community before the individual. It is an ordered communion, and it talks about what we share in common before we're different.
Thank you, Susan. I think that's a great help to understand that, because everybody who takes the opportunity to read the final document, I think, will be really surprised, if you like, that the final document really begins with this baptismal ecclesiology. And I think that's a whole new way of thinking. And actually, so I think also for the canon lawyers, the question then arises, if we're going to reflect on all of this, what would that mean for a change of the current law? And I think canon lawyers, the change of the current law, as well as the already implementation of some of the things that came from the Synod, and for which maybe we don't necessarily have to wait for the legislator to say something, because the document has been approved by the Holy Father. And I think through the implementation, we can really do much more than what many people might think. So we have to be creative. I'm going to ask you another question, Susan, considering also the time we have. Because as an ecumenist, you are also very much involved in these questions. We see in the Synod that it's left to the local church to develop these ministries. So many of us are used to wait for Rome to come with the document and to tell us, oh, you can now develop this or that ministry. Can you say something about, and by the way, for everybody who is listening, the Synod does not use anymore the universal church. It speaks about the whole church. So that whole thing of particular church and universal church, if you go through the document, you will see that the document uses the local church, not the particular church, exactly to locate that people of God idea. The Eucharist is the center of that community, but it's always a specific group. So the synodal document is also saying we have become aware that you cannot understand the church without the context. And so this whole process that we did in the past few years was a process of what Lumen Gentium calls the back and forth between the local and the universal. But we have discovered that we must consider the local church not as a little division of the church universal, but as a church fully as it is. Lumen Gentium 26 already confirms that. So the question then comes, Susan, if this is the people of God with the bishop, can you imagine that it would be, for example, for the diocesan pastoral council to discern together what could be other ministries? Would that be an expression of that baptismal ecclesiology under the leadership of the bishop for the diocesan pastoral council, which, by the way, is not a council of laity, but a council of the people of God? Could you share some ideas on that interaction, local? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, even as early as Paul VI, when he created the instituted ministries, he told Episcopal conferences that they could petition for additional ministries, if they discern that need. Now, that didn't happen, and we had to wait till Francis to create the instituted ministry of catechist, for example. But and that's at the level of instituted ministries. I mean, as I mentioned before, there are all kinds of levels that depend on stability and depend on task and with their own liturgical rites for how they enter into this work. That, yes, but I would also say that the emphasis today, especially with instituted ministries, is that they're not just liturgical functions, that they represent a service and a ministry beyond the liturgy in the community. And so we shouldn't just be thinking liturgically, but thinking about how do we meet the needs of the people, go to the periphery, and extend the presence of the church through various ways. And I think one of the weaknesses is that we've too often associated all this with just a liturgical presence. But like, Hervé Legrand a long time ago determined that the leader of the community presided over the sacrament of unity. But what we're seeing, that the lector should be a servant of the word outside of liturgy, and that the acolyte builds up the community, the body of Christ, by visiting the sick and caring for the church in other ways. So we need this broader notion of church, and that all is determined at the local level, is how these individuals serve.
Thank you. I think, Father Puru, we can go to the next slide. Yes, because we want to alert people before we go to the questions. So when you will receive, I guess everybody will receive the PowerPoint, no? So you will find some further information about what we have been doing. And as you will see, there's information about the Peter and Paul Seminar Research Group, but also this project that we did. The Dean of the Faculty of Ottawa also participated in that, as did Professor Kathy Clifford. I think Professor Kohlberg is online with us. She participated in that. So it's a group of theologians, Professor Gilles Routier from Quebec, English, French-speaking people from around the world. We did that, and we're very grateful that at St. Paul University in Studia Canonica we have this publication. And the next slides will then show you the cover already. Susan Wood's new book is coming soon, and the cover is already there. So maybe if there are questions, I think we can move to that.
We were very happy to listen to both of you, Professors Myriam and Susan. We would like to thank you for sharing with us your profound expertise in this current area of global discussion in the Church regarding synodality. Your insights, both theological and canonical, have given us new viewpoints to better understand various aspects of this synodality, especially from the perspective of involvement, whether we call it participation or cooperation, of the leadership of lay persons, especially women, in our Church. So thanks so much to both of you, and may God continue to bless you all, bless you both in all your endeavors. A big thanks to all people at St. Paul University involved in the preparation and conducting of this session, especially to the members of the coordinating team, along with me, our faculty's dean, Professor Chad Glendinning, Sister Louise Charbonneau, administrator of the Center for Canonical Services, and Mrs. Ruth Burrow, assistant to the dean and program coordinator. Finally, a special thanks to all of you, the participants in this webinar, either live or offline. We are truly grateful to you that by your presence and support, you support our initiatives and thus encouraged to continue. We were very happy to note that we have had more than 350 registrations for today's webinar. Thanks again, and goodbye to all of you. God bless you all. Thank you.